This weekend's one of the best weekends in football. You're going to get together, probably many of you with your buddies. You're going to watch basically the final 8 teams in the NFL play in the divisional round of the playoffs. It is an American pastime, ratings through the roof. Big hits, tough sacks, and yes, you got injuries after injuries, and you almost get inured to it. For many fans, the players, they look cool in the uniforms here, but you don't relate. Amazing physical specimens, unbelievable talents. They get paid, but the compensation, it relates to the field, but maybe not to the lifetime that comes after it. There are some injuries players can never come back from here. No rehab will ever cover this long after their careers have ended. And that's the backdrop of a massive class action lawsuit against the NFL being brought by now more than 5,000 former players. It alleges that the league, aware of the dangers of concussions and multiple concussions, but kept the information from the players. And what's more, suit alleges the league created an atmosphere that mythologized and even glorified the violent behaviors that led to it. And that, the same atmosphere, served to push players back into harm's way despite all those dangers. Well, a lot of people say that backdrop may have been part of the story for one of the best defensive players in recent generations, Junior Seau. 10-time All-Pro linebacker over a 20-year career, but his medical exam has just concluded following Seau's suicide last year and then his family donating his brain to science. It was the injury we couldn't see that led to his untimely demise. And for more, I want to bring in Andrew now.
And Rich, those post-mortem tests on Junior Seau have proven that he was suffering from a degenerative brain disease, which likely contributed to his suicidal mindset. And while that disease cannot be traced back to any one hit or even to the multiple concussions he suffered during his time in the league, the conclusion was that the condition of his brain was similar to individuals with, quote, exposure to repetitive head injury. In other words, it's a pretty accurate description of a slew of longtime football players.
The sudden suicide last year of former NFL star Junior Seau shocked sports fans and sent his family scrambling for answers.
We just wanted the truth.
Seau was a legend on the gridiron, a 12-time Pro Bowler who was known for crushing hits like this over a nearly 20-year career. But it's those bruising blows that made Seau's family and many others question what made him shoot himself in the chest.
The head-to-head contact, the collisions they're out of control.
The Seaus donated Junior's brain to the National Institutes of Health, and ABC News and ESPN learning exclusively that tests showed visible signs of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's a concussion-related injury that shrinks and hardens brain tissue. Hard knocks are a major part of the NFL, part of the reason it's America's most popular sport.
If you add up all those days of practice, training camp and games, that's a lot of hits.
But recently, the league has come under fire. Last summer, more than 2,000 former NFL players sued the league in a landmark class action lawsuit. They claimed the NFL misled them for decades on the risk of brain injury.
There's just no focus on the most important part of your body, which is your brain.
The league insists it's made player safety a top priority. The Seaus say they understand that violence is a part of football, and while the hits make the highlight reels,
it's not worth it for me to not have a dad.
The response of the NFL, only that the findings on Junior Seau underscore the need for more research on concussion-related injuries. Rich?
Thank you, Andrew. Now, for more on concussions, football, and even life after the NFL with all that came with it, I had a chance to sit down recently with former Giants captain Harry Carson. Carson, a Hall of Fame linebacker himself. He played 12 seasons with the Giants and was selected to the Pro Bowl 9 times. In fact, he was a captain in some of those teams. But since his retirement in 1988, Carson, he's been plagued with ailments, among them post-concussion syndrome, and he believes many of those problems were the direct result of the concussions he suffered on the field and the 15 concussions, by his estimate, he suffered while wearing a Giants jersey. Take us back to when you were playing. Do you remember your first concussion you got?
I think it was probably back in 10th grade when I went out for the football team for the second time. First time I went out for the team was in 9th grade, and I quit on the first day. So there was nothing to talk about, you know, in that one day of practice. But the second year that I came back, and you know, I was determined to just stick and stay and be there. And we went through the various tackling drills and bull in the ring and all of this stuff, you know, and I think it was at that point that I sustained my first concussion. And it wasn't that I was knocked out or anything, but, you know, coming to understand what traumatic brain injury and concussions are all about, it was me seeing stars. You know, I got hit, or I hit somebody so hard that I saw twinkling little stars in before my eyes. So that was the first time.
And even for folks in the audience, myself, who played football at obviously a level much lower than you did, whether it was a bull in the ring, the Oklahoma drill, it was called getting your bell rung at the time.
Yeah.
It obviously escalates. The larger the players, the faster the speed. You then go to college, and then you go to the pros. How much was it discussed? How much concern was it from when you first got into the league to when you left about the impacts of concussions, both in the short and the long term?
Well, that was never really discussed. And during the time that I played, it was never about a concussion. It was just getting your bell rung. And that was it. The whole lexicon of concussion was never really used. So when I played and you got your bell rung or you got dinged, you know, if they had to go out and pick you up and bring you off the field, then they may have said something about, you know, getting your bell rung. Not necessarily about concussions. And we didn't really talk about it. It was just a part of the game. The doctors didn't talk about it. The trainers didn't talk about it. And the players certainly didn't talk about it, because it was just something that was a given. If you're going to play football, you know, things like that were going to happen.
There was also an expectation, I would imagine, where if you see a guy who's having trouble walking, or if there's somebody who's got trouble lifting his arm over his shoulder, that if you're foggy or if you have a concussion, that's not really an injury. So there was a pressure among the player himself, I would imagine, but also from the team and the players on the team to get back on the field.
Well, the pressure probably is placed more by the player to get back on the field, because that player has trained. He's gone to training camp. He's withered the hardships of training camp and being with his friends, especially on the high school level. And he's now, during the course of a football season, he gets dinged. And he wants to get back on the football field because he wants to contribute. He wants to be a part of the team. He wants to be out there with all of the guys that he started with and he wants to finish with.
Talk about, from a human perspective, because a lot of us see these guys in pads and a number on the back, but we don't know the person. Obviously, we got a window into Junior Seau's tragedy, but there's so many others.
You go through a reunion and you can see the changes that have taken place, whether it's physical changes, mental changes, or psychological changes that have taken place in these players from the time that you played to now. And you have to have really a trained eye to understand exactly what's going on. There are players who I played with in high school, and I see the same thing, the changes that have taken place, and also in college. But there are players who have played in the National Football League, and you know, I saw these players, and I am an observer of my surroundings. And I look at players, and you know, when I started talking about concussions way back in the 90s, you know, there were guys who laughed at me because they didn't know exactly what a concussion was. And they feared that I was in the same sort of predicament as a Muhammad Ali. But those same players are now dealing with the ramifications of concussions that they sustained years ago when they played. Concussions have always been around. They've always been a part of the game. And they will always be a part of the game. It's just that unless you have something that is visible, like a limp or like a knee ailment, an ankle or something like that, people really don't know the damage that has taken place in the brain or with the brain. And so they look at a player and they think that he is that same guy who played years ago, and he might be just a shell of himself. I knew something was going on with me back in the early 80s when I was still a player. I knew that I was experiencing bouts of depression. I didn't really know exactly why. I knew that there were times when I'd give interviews and I would be searching for words that I wanted to use, but I couldn't really retrieve those words to complete my thoughts. As captain of the Giants, I knew that there was something going on, and I chose to deal with it personally as opposed to, you know, just going out and talking about it. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed in 1990, 2 years after I left football, with post-concussion syndrome, that I felt open enough to talk about what I was experiencing, because I knew that if I was experiencing these things as a player, with all the players who were playing and all the hits that were taking place, I knew that there were probably a whole lot of other guys dealing with the same thing. For players who really don't know, they can literally think that they're going crazy because they, you know, the brain controls everything. Everything. It controls your judgment, not just the five senses of smell, taste, feel, speech, hearing. It controls your judgment. It controls your emotions and all of this stuff. So when you hear about a player who has these mood swings, that might be a result of concussions that he sustained. And he may not even understand that he is experiencing these mood swings.
It surprised me in reading for the interview. You said if you had to do it all over again with what you do now, you'd do it differently.
Nobody told me years ago that if I played, if I sustained an injury to my brain, I may never ever be the same person. And for me, that is a price too steep to pay, because as I said before, the brain controls everything. And you don't know how a concussion is going to manifest itself with you and how you live your life years down the road. They pay you money to play professional football, but they pay you for the talents that you bring to the table, not for the injuries that you take away from the game. And for me, quite frankly, I would not, you know, given the choice to do it again, I would not do it strictly from a neurological risk standpoint, because you're really playing Russian roulette.
You yourself, your youngest son, I remember, 6'5", 275. He didn't pass the physical, but he was getting ready to play top D1 football potentially. And you breathe a sigh of relief when he doesn't. You have grandchildren now.
Yeah.
Would you want your grandkids to play football?
No, I've stated emphatically to my daughter and to her husband, my son-in-law, that he's 2, he'll be 3 next week. He is not going to play football. And that is something that I feel very emphatic about, and they understand that. And he can get in his little stance and play and all of that stuff fine, but he's not going to play football. Knowing what I know now, if someone had told me, or if someone had told my parents years ago, I think my parents would have made the same decision, that I would not play, but I did play. But from what I know, and I'm sort of like Oprah from this standpoint, what I know for pretty damn sure. And I really can't be questioned, because I've already been diagnosed. I was diagnosed 2 years after I left football. I knew what I was going through while I played. And I've seen all of this evidence around me with players who played before me, players who played during my era, and also players who played after I played. And for me, it's like this. If it waddles like a duck, and if it sounds like a duck, and if it looks like a duck, then it's a duck.
Again, that's Harry Carson here, saying he wouldn't have done it again. It wouldn't have had his kid, let alone his grandchild, play. So take that for what it's worth. We're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, more on the cost here of glory, and also the cost about potentially here football in this country changing. I'm not just talking at the NFL level. What if you can't get insurance and you're a college, a high school, or even Pop Warner? We'll talk about that after this.